Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is the Ukraine War Frontline update for the 12th of May 2023. Let's get straight to the northeast sector, to the Kupiansk to Svatova-Kreminna front line. The axis here looks like this on the war mapper map. On my map, that looks like this: Kupiansk, Svatova, and further down south to Kreminna. ISW has relatively little say, just a few bits of I guess activity around Kupiansk, northeast. So Russian forces conducted limited ground attacks northeast of Kupiansk. Geolocated footage published on the 11th yesterday shows artillery elements operating near Vilshana. So I was talking about how Ukrainians seem to have taken back some territory in the Vilshana area. I haven't really heard too much about activity on the ground, although there is, as you can see here, artillery activity going on there, and then unsuccessful attacks in the Serebryantska forest area, that's near Kreminna, and Mazyotivka, Stelmakivka, Makivka, and Bilahorivka. So Mazyotivka is up there, just to the north of Kupiansk, and then really it's coming down to Stelmakivka, which is just to the west of Svatova. To use my other mouse here. Stelmakivka there, Makivka, Serebryantska forest in this area here, and then Bilahorivka there. There has been some, again, there was a talk yesterday from the Suryat maps, Russian pro mapper, talking about how that unit there, that I forget what type of refinery or I don't know infrastructure that was, but that was taken over by the Russians yesterday, and then it's moving down to Spirna. Now, I have some information on Spirna, but again, it's difficult to verify this information. It's all pretty chaotic at the moment. Here it is. So everyone is talking about big and sexy counteroffensive, but I can tell you minor good news. After repeated Russian attacks in Spirna, their assault force was degraded and they had to run away, abandoning their equipment, including the most modern of their tanks. So that was in Spirna. However, from Suryat maps, they did show a really minor bit of gain in Spirna, which is just basically looks like a tiny bit of triangle there. So there is activity taking place in Spirna, as according to that source, the Russians have had a bloody nose there. Just in general, there was all this talk last night of counteroffensives. The counteroffensive starting is more like localized counterattacks. Just to give you a bit of a synopsis, Russia is freaking out. Several Russian military correspondents are reporting the beginning of the Ukrainian counteroffensive claims. The Ukraine had launched an attack near Mayorsk, that's 15 miles south of Bakhmut. Ukraine is encircling Wagner PMC in Bakhmut. Ukrainian armored groups near Soledar, that's just north of Bakhmut. Ukrainian columns have been moving all day toward the Russian border with Belgorod region near Kupiansk, and that is then repeated here. Russian telegram channels panic about the potential Ukrainian strike toward the Russian border city of Belgorod. Long columns of Ukrainian tanks and infantry fighting vehicles were reportedly spotted on the Kharkiv ring road today, driving toward the Russian border. That would be, well, in fact, we go and look at the war mapper map. You've got Kharkiv. They're almost certainly going to be sending equipment to this front, so there could be some activity much further up north than I was predicting earlier on. Just to let you know here that Belgorod is fairly close to the Ukrainian border there, just north of Kharkiv. So they've been worried because they've been hit by different kinds of munitions. There is artillery activity all along this border line, but also lots of drones are flown into Belgorod. In fact, much earlier on in this conflict, there was even a helicopter attack by the Ukrainians across there. So they are on tenterhooks as to whether they will be an objective. I sincerely doubt that. That'd just be a bad move on the Ukrainians' front, I would have thought. But certainly could be an offensive or reinforcements being considered up in the northern areas here of the front line. But as you hear, there's a lot of talk about what's going on in the Bakhmut area. Just before we get there, this is no reports talking about Bilahorivka, just south of the forest. Says that if we go to what he actually says about that, in the vicinity of Kreminna, Russian troops, the Akhmat and LPR, have taken over the Zakidna filtration plant. I'd already reported that yesterday. Surya Maps reported that yesterday. So this is no reports kind of catching up. Fighting takes place there at the eastern entrance of the town. So it's just confirmation of a map movement that has already taken place. Okay, let's now go towards Bakhmut and consider what has actually been going on there. So we're going to come down from, we were just talking about Bilohorivka there. We're talking about Spirna just before that. We're now going to go into Bakhmut proper. And there's an awful lot of information to consider in Bakhmut. I guess let's go to the ISW first. Give it a bit of an overview in their preamble about Bakhmut. So they say Ukrainian forces likely broke through some Russian lines in localized counterattacks near Bakhmut, prompting responses from Wagner Group financier Prigozhin and the Russian MOD. Sursky, the Ukrainian commander, stated that Russian forces retreated up to 2 kilometers behind Russian lines in unspecified sectors of the Bakhmut front. His confirmation of Ukrainian gains prompted a response from Prigozhin, who claimed that Ukrainian forces have started the counteroffensive and recaptured 3 kilometers of ground in and around Bakhmut. The Russian MOD acknowledged that Ukrainian counterattacks uncharacteristically quickly, claiming that Russian forces repelled 8 ground attacks and 3 reconnaissance force efforts in Donetsk region, but denied reports that Ukrainian forces broke through the Russian defensive lines. Prigozhin and the MOD's responses are reflective of increased panic in the Russian information space over speculations about planned Ukrainian counteroffensives and indicate increased concern among Wagner and Russian MOD leadership, as well as reflecting Kremlin guidance to avoid downplaying Ukrainian successes. Now, the deployment of low-quality Russian forces on the flanks around Bakhmut suggests that the Russian MOD has largely abandoned the aim of encircling a significant number of Ukrainian forces there, which is to say that the idea that Russia are going to take Bakhmut, I could show you comments from the people who are still commenting down in my thread. Some of the pro-Russian voices, a couple of them have given up commenting, like Frankie B. These pro-Russian voices saying Bakhmut is falling. It's going to be falling like dominoes. And I just want to put them up there, plaster them up there, highlight them as just being wrong, wrong, wrong. Just the pro-Russian bots that come on these threads and say their nonsense are demonstrably wrong in their claims that they make. Bakhmut has not fallen, and it is highly unlikely that Russia will be able to successfully encircle the troops left here, let alone go on to Chaziv Yar. I just think they have run out of any kind of steam. And then finally, unnamed Kremlin sources claim that Wagner Group financier Prigozhin, his recent rhetoric is seriously disturbing the top leadership. Yeah, I'm absolutely unsurprising there. He is saying things that it will surely be riling the Russian leadership. Right, let's go and have a look at the mapping around Bakhmut. Now, we go first to the war map. They show that there have been gains for the Ukrainians to the north near Bodanivka and just around Kromova near that road, the 00506, where the Russians had taken some trenches around there, and then we had seen geolocated footage of the Ukrainians taking that back, and they've produced a little bit of a buffer zone between the road and the Russian front lines, and then within the city itself towards the south of the lines there, as well as, I mean, it doesn't go further out to the southwest, but there have been gains there. If we look at the map from Rebar, the pro-Russian source, it shows that indeed there is quite a lot of activity all over the place, particularly north and south outside of the city. War map is surprising me because actually where it shows that Ukrainians have taken some territory back here, we haven't seen that. I don't see that in many other maps. It appears to be a story of the Russians still pressuring inside Bakhmut, but the Ukrainians pressuring on the flanks. So I'd be interested to see whether that has happened. As you can see there, it sort of fits in line with that road going across there, which would be to say that the Ukrainians might well have taken back some of this land around here. But I can't be sure of that. It's a little bit, difficult to work out exactly what has happened there. Just going on what War Mapper said. Now, Institute for the Study of War talks about changing mapping around. I'm just going to wait until the dust settles a little bit for what's going on inside Bakhmut. So this does confirm actually War Mapper's claims a little bit. but not hugely, which is to say a little bit of ground around here retaken. Um, but yeah, so Institute for the Study of War has a thread on stuff going on, but it's mainly on the outskirts for the Ukrainians. So you can see in the north there and areas of the south. Again, I've changed my map a little bit, but it could well be that over the next 24 hours it changed more fundamentally. This report says the Ukrainian armed forces, this is from Nexta, launched an attack near Soledar and seek to encircle Bakhmut, the Kremlin's war correspondent said. According to them, Ukrainian forces, with the support of several units of armed groups, each with 2 to 3 tanks, were able to organize a breakthrough. Now the Ukrainians are trying to consolidate on the occupied positions, and the situation is difficult. That's a quote from the Russians. The situation is difficult for the Russian occupiers. They also claim that the Ukrainians are conducting an operation to encircle Bakhmut, and in the next 24 hours they expect to attack by the AFU in the Zaporizhia region, quote, with the aim of breaking through the first line of defense. The AFU General Staff has neither confirmed nor denied this information so far, and that is the map they provide with that. So an attack from the north, attack from the south, and you can imagine that makes quite a lot of sense. I think they're going to be trying to cut off this area first, just to the east of the canal, in that northernmost area of the Russian occupied territory there. Let's have a look at other maps. So this is a Wagner map that famously, it came out yesterday. It caused a lot of stir. This is one of the first maps to show that the Russians themselves have admitted that they had taken losses over the last couple of days. And as you can see, there is, yeah, I can zoom in using this mouse. No, I'm going to use the touchpad. No, I'm not. I'm going to completely fail in tech. That goes to show, you know, don't try something new. Anyway, you can see that the Ukrainians have taken areas back in the north. You can see that here the Russians seem to think the Ukrainians didn't have purchase even south of this 00506, that perhaps the Russians had some kind of territorial gain to the south of that road. But now they have lost that there. They've lost some territory near Bodanivka. And then if you come down to the canal area, 2 parts of the canal, to the north, and then this larger area to the south, but no admission that the Ukrainians have regained territory within the city. So yeah, and then no report says, since there are currently lots of rumors about local offensives, and there is also a lot of fake news being spread, I will stick to summing up what the Russian channels claimed happened tonight in terms of further reporting. So this is kind of summarizing the panic that the Russians have been showing on their socials. But it's also interesting to think that, right, if that's what's happened, reflecting a couple of small counterattacks in Bakhmut and maybe elsewhere, imagine what they're going to be saying and how they're going to be panicking when the counteroffensive starts for proper. So a summary would be the AFU encirclement operations in Bakhmut near Berkivka, and Yehidny, breakthroughs in the Soledar area, local success by the Ukrainian army in Mayorsk, we'll come to that, Ukrainian columns spotted near Belgorod border, we've mentioned that, and UA chemical attack near Orikhiv. So that's what they're claiming, that that has taken place. So this source says Ukraine has begun a series of local counterattacks in the Bakhmut area. First, they pushed the Russians to the canal in the south, and now they're attacking the Russian positions near Bodanivka and Kromova Road. At the same time, both Russians and Ukrainian channels are reporting intensifying Ukrainian actions in multiple directions. Russian MOD saying that the general situation is under control, which means that local situations might not be under control at all. Russian MOD also speaks of Ukrainian actions in the direction of Milo-Linovka, and that's in the northern part of Bakhmut. The Ukrainian gains might be greater than we know at the moment, and there's the possibility of counterattacks also inside the city of Bakhmut. I suspect, and this is what I talked about in the news piece this morning, I suspect that these diversionary attacks, are both political and military goals. If Russia sends reserves to Bakhmut, they might decisively weaken other sectors. If they don't, there's a possibility of significant political humiliation. Both options are good for Ukraine. So I talked about how actually, if you imagine Bakhmut now and you think, right, Ukrainians are doing some limited counterattacks. What do the Russians do? This could be a massive PR disaster if they actually start getting beaten back in the area. But they don't have a huge number of forces in reserve if the intelligence is much to go by. So where do they take those troops from? And if they take those troops from, any other particular area where they have to take them from somewhere, does it weaken other areas significantly and allow that to be a potential point for a Ukrainian counterattack or counteroffensive? Or do they try and hold on to Bakhmut with what they've got? Well, it seems like the Ukrainians are able to take territory back with quite a limited set of resources. Not like they're flooding the area completely, and this is the scene of a massive counteroffensive. These are limited counterattacks in certain areas, and they're taking back quite large swaths of territory that has taken the Russians quite a long time and a lot of effort and a lot of resources to take. It could be that the Ukrainians take back significant portions of the territory they have lost over the last months in days and weeks, with limited resources to use, just a few armored units, some sensible attacks here, sensible attacks there. And that could mean that they are not really affecting their counterattack potential, counteroffensive potential elsewhere. And I would say that would be super sensible, which is get the Russians to panic in Bakhmut, use the troops they've already got supposedly positioned in Chaziv Yar. They've got a number of troops in and around this area, Kostantinivka, that they are using to rotate. Use those troops for a limited sort of counterattack in this general area. Force the Russians to panic, send troops there, and take advantage of that panic by having counteroffensives elsewhere. That would be, I think, a fairly sensible appraisal of what's going on there. Let me know if that makes any sense to you. Right, Defmon, who started getting back in the mapping business, has said he's talking about how if we go back to he's saying there's starting to be a slight uncomfortable feeling in the Russian Telegram channels. The last few days, there have been reports about a river crossing close to Velika Novosilka. So that's further down south. Indeed, he talks about it there. That's near to the west of Vuhledar. In fact, you can see Vuhledar there. But he then goes on to say there are also some local counterattacks with success in Bakhmut. In addition to that, there are very recent Russian Telegram reports of Ukrainian offensives in Soledar and Mayorsk. So Mayorsk is just to the south of Bakhmut, and it's this railway, I wouldn't say hub, but it's a junction where you've got a railway coming from the north, one coming from the west, meets here in Mayorsk. And there was months back quite a bit of activity there. Ukrainians took a tiny bit of territory back fairly recently. There's a bit of readjustment of the lines in this area, but basically it's been fairly static. That could have changed. There are several reports of attacks there, but I haven't seen any sort of footage or other confirmation of that. When it comes to Rebar's claims of what's actually going on, according to Wagner and Prigozhin, if you hit the flanks, the Russian group in the Bakhmut direction, these areas were transferred to the regular troops by Wagner detachments due to a lower number of assault detachments and the orchestra focusing on Bakhmut itself. And this is kind of towing the party line, the PMC party line. So Prigozhin saying it's kind of blaming the regular Russian army. In fact, Rebar's been quite critical or saying some things that are a little bit on the edge over the last few days. According to reports from the field, the enemy managed to push through Russian defenses near Klishchivka and Bodonivka, so that's south and north. The loss of positions near Bodonivka was indirectly confirmed by the MOD, who mentioned hostilities in the direction of Malo-Ilyanovka. The zone of control of the AFU in the western quarters of Bakhmut has shrunk by another 220 meters. So that's to say the claim is that the Russians have made gains there inside Bakhmut, and fighting is going on in one of the three main fortified areas of the enemy, in the Nest. All three fortified areas are mapped. In general, local collapses of the front and a powerful media campaign by Prigozhin against the Russian MOD will most likely have a reaction. Perhaps in the coming days, we will see the activation of the Russian armed forces in the Bakhmut direction. That is a question. What will they do? How will they cope with this? The ISW says pretty much what we've already said. I won't go through it. I won't read it all. It does say geolocated footage shows that Ukrainian forces push Russian forces from the section of T0504 Bakhmut Chaziv Yar highway in southwestern Bakhmut. Now, this footage is footage I showed you yesterday of the guy that almost got his legs shot off, and I was saying, really, should you be standing that close? Anyway, that's now being geolocated because open source intelligence is cool. And this is here. We'll go and see where that ends up being. there was quite a lot of activity in that video where they get out the infantry fighting vehicle and they attack the positions. That is right on the edge of the canal, so that's where that footage was from. That shows that there is activity there, and it is offensive activity involving combined arms. You've got at least, mechanized equipment, almost certainly drone spotting, as well as infantry as well. So that is right there. But we have seen that the Ukrainians have also taken land to the south of that. There's still some quite big difference between the mappers in what's going on. Deep State map hasn't changed too much with regard to what happened yesterday. And there is some rejigging of Syriac maps, a pro-Russian mapper in red here, showing that the Ukrainians have definitely made gains in the areas we talked about. Deep State map has, the one major thing it changed was Ukrainian presence here. Actually, it's not so much of moving the Russian line back, but moving the Ukrainian line forward in through the grey zone. So it looks like they are understanding that the Ukrainians are definitely pushing there, that they are in that set of fields. But if we go just quickly back to ISW, successful localized Ukrainian counterattacks have likely constrained Russian offensive efforts in Bakhmut yesterday. Ukrainian officials reported that Russian forces conducted 15 ground attacks, so that's not many. It's a notable decrease, they say. A Russian mill blogger said that the situation, the Stupochki assault, is risky. So Stupochki is just in that area. A Russian mill bloggers criticized the Russian 4th and 374th Motorized Rifle Brigades for abandoning their positions northwest of Klishchivka. So that's not just the 72nd that were ridiculed yesterday for running away by Prigozhin, but there are other units too. Ukrainian counterattacks have said that Wagner Group forces took up the brigade's former positions to prevent deep penetration of Russian lines, likely depriving Wagner forces of personnel that could otherwise have been allocated to offensive operations in Bakhmut. So this is the idea that Wagner are having to secure the lines here where the conventional forces have run away, and that then takes their capacity away from doing their offensive work inside Bakhmut, which would give the Ukrainians a potential to hit back in Bakhmut, where the Russians might be a little bit weaker. Wagner financier Prigozhin claimed that Wagner forces only need to advance 625 meters to reach the western entrance to Bakhmut, a rhetorical shift suggesting that Prigozhin is unwilling to completely abandon his goal of completing the capture of Bakhmut in favor of defending against localized counter-attacks by the Ukrainians. Right, last bit here. The Republic of Tatarstan's Alga Volunteer Battalion, part of the 72nd Motorized Rifle Brigade, so they were the ones who ran away, reportedly lost contact with personnel's affiliated social media channels following the retreat 2 days ago. The Alga, or 3 days ago, the Alga Battalion is one of the two elements of the 72nd Brigade. There is currently no information on whether the brigade's second element, the Molot Volunteer Battalion, was defeated or retreated. So they've lost contact with two of these units around there, and there's not heard hide nor hear of them at all. So there you go. That's what's going on in Bakhmut. Again, it's going to be a case of keeping a close eye on that. It's going to be really, really dynamic, I would imagine. There are going to be lots of claims coming out. I might not adapt my map straight away all the time. It might be just waiting to see, but you can imagine that there'll be, I would think, Ukrainian gains in the north and in the south. And I'll be interested to see what happens actually in Bakhmut, whether they, because here's the thing, right? It's going to be super expensive to take areas inside Bakhmut in urban fighting back, right? So what you do is you encircle Bakhmut, you get these guys to panic, and you get them to run away, and that's how you take Bakhmut. So I would think that they would try and hold the line defensively here, and attack offensively to the south and to the north to do exactly what was suggested. Where was it? Where are you? I know you're here. All these different here it is. So you start doing that, and then the Russians here will start panicking and going, okay, we are absolutely hammered on the flanks, let's run away. I doubt they'd hold on and try and defend, but if they do that, you just encircle them and wait them out and hit them with artillery and aviation. So I would imagine that the Ukrainians won't try and take territory back in a major way. Inside there might be smaller attacks on buildings and little areas here, but I think most of the work is going to be done north and south. But hey, what do I know? Um, yeah. And just to let you know, that Igor Gherkin was also bang on about how badly it's going in uh, in Bakhmut. He says, I was told how ours lost Opornik, 2 tanks and a BMP2. The airfield entered, and ours did not have any anti-tank weapons on the front line at 0. In the forward female defensive midfielder, they did not have anti-tank weapons. I don't quite know what that means, but there was no ATGM, Manpads, RPG. There were probably only automatics. You can't win much with machine guns against tanks. All the guys died, and the Satanists occupied the Opnik. That's how our retreated and ran straight to the sky. Such anger. So I'm not quite sure it's a Google translation, but you get the idea that actually the Russian guys there just don't have the equipment to take on mechanized equipment themselves. And this might be partly because actually no one's really used mechanized equipment in Bakhmut to any meaningful extent, so they don't need to be carrying around stuff like ATGMs as much as they might do elsewhere. And so there's a lot more hand-to-hand fighting, maybe mortar. But then when the Ukrainians do start using tanks, the Russians don't have the equipment to deal with them. And as a result, they get pushed back and die. And that makes Igor Gherkin particularly angry. I don't really care that he's that angry. Right. The other, in fact, I do care. I think it's good. The angrier he is, the worse it's going for them. So French have donated these MO120 RT mortars. These mortars are significant. They are massive bits of kit. Now, oh, Jesus. And these are worthy of note because these are the only mortar. If you remember the Thomas Tyner thread I went through recently, he said there's only one rifled mortar, and I'm pretty sure it's this one. Looking at the shells that he's using, they're massive shells, but I don't think they have got fins. So these are significant pieces of mortar equipment, and you also pull on a line to take them out. So he's pulling on a line there. So these are I'm pretty sure these are the French rifled ones. They have a lot greater distance and more explosive capability. So that is what's being used in the Bakhmut area there, as you can see from that video. And then really we go on past Bakhmut further down to the south on towards Adivka. I've done some mapping changes. So as we come past Mayos, there's going to be activity there. I don't have the details, but there appears to be a counterattack of some variety there. I've changed all the mapping down here actually to become a little bit more accurate, and actually it's more preferential to Ukraine. Just it's a rejigging, not any kind of movement of actual troops, but actually it turns out that Russia didn't have as much territory around here as I'd previously thought, or I hadn't updated my mapping around here as according to other mappers because I just hadn't concentrated on this region. And then around the Adivka area, it's fairly stable. Let's go and have a look at the deets. So the ISW says there's a little bit of gain around the Kamyanka area. Actually, I've taken the Russian mapping back. Syriac maps had adapted their mapping to show that there's this area to the east of the highway coming down here that the pro-Ukrainian mapper, Deep State map, had claimed was in Ukrainian hands. Actually, Syriac map has adjusted their map to reflect that, so I've just changed that. Rebar pro-Russian source says about Avdiivka, the assault operation to capture the Avdiivka entrenchment continues. Russian units are advancing simultaneously from several directions. In the Kamyanka and Opitny areas, several AFU entrenchments have been liberated and the control zones have been significantly expanded. There's no particular evidence for that. I don't know that there's any major territorial gains for the Russians either in Kamyanka or the Opitny area. That could just be a bit of fanciful rhetoric, or something might have happened there, just waiting for evidence of that. And then elsewhere it says really comes on, doesn't really talk about hledar, doesn't talk about Marinka, but mentions that Ukrainian forces reportedly conducted a limited and localized counterattack in western Donetsk Oblast. Yesterday, a Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces counterattacked and crossed the Shaitanka River near Novodonetsk. Yeah, Novodonetsk. This is possibly what Defmon was referring to. In fact, it definitely seems it is. So here you've got Novodonetsk there, and the river just to the north of that. You've also got a claim here from Wargonzo. So let's just have a look at that and see what the translation of this is. And that looks like in the Vuhledar area. So this is Ukrainian troops attacked from the Zolotoy Niva in the Vuhledar sector and managed to cross the Shaitanka River near the village of Novodonetsk. So actually, that's exactly the same claim that we've seen from Defmon. He's probably got it from Wargonzo. So let's go and have a look at that. If we come out of Adivka, come down south past Marinka, no news of that, no news of Vuhledar, and then move on to this river area, which goes, you can see that it comes to the south of Vuhledar, this kind of waterway there, and comes along here, and attack from Zolota Niva down to the river, crossing the river there, and possibly, making some advances near Novodonetsk. So that is the situation there, some activity there. And this was where actually I changed to the mapping yesterday. Deep State Map had this as something that happened yesterday. So that was perhaps 2 days ago, and it's only being caught up with now, or it's an ongoing kind of, not a counter-attack, but maybe a reconnaissance and force that has some kind of purchase. But there is certainly activity going on there. As for the rest of Donetsk, no news from ISW, and we'll go to look at Zaporizhia Oblast. So nothing in the ISW about Zaporizhia, and again, there's going to be a lot of operational security going on. There were some rumors about the Ukrainians using chemical warfare or chemical weapons, south of Orikhiv or around the Orikhiv area. That's going to be panic in the Russian ranks. I severely doubt they will have done that. That would just obviously annoy any supporters they have. So that would be just a bad decision, I would have thought. So ISW goes on to concentrate on Kherson. Russian forces targeted Ukrainian positions west of Hledar. Okay, that's yesterday, so a bit of artillery dueling. The Ukrainian Southern Operational Command reported that Russian forces increased the intensity of shelling and shelled the west bank of Kherson Oblast 98 times. Russian forces are reportedly becoming more active in shelling the Dnipro-Buzka estuary against the backdrop of Black Sea Grain Initiative talks. So that is this area. So you've got the Bug River, and you've got the Dnipro River and the estuary here. There normally would be quite a lot of maritime activity around there, but obviously, given that Russia controlled the southern area of land there, that is difficult to. It's a difficult place to sail a boat, I guess. Ukrainian military officials reported that Russian forces struck Stanislav, that's southwest of Kherson, and Kizomys. So I showed you those yesterday with 7 KAB 500 guided aerial bombs and targeted civilian infrastructure in Zaporizhia city with 2 S-300 missiles. And the Russian mill blogger claimed that fighting is ongoing on Voloky Potemkin Island in the Dnipro River Delta. So that's all the same stuff that I reported yesterday, but continued use of these FAB 500s. I presume it's more use on top of what was reported yesterday. Kizomys I reported was hit yesterday. Stanislav I reported yesterday as well. So it could be that they're just reporting that 2 days in a row, but it's only happened once. I told you about how Berislav was hit big time as well. It was interesting listening to Ukraine, the latest podcast yesterday from the Daily Telegraph. We had a reporter that visited Berislav and said it's basically like a ghost town, and some of these places along here there really isn't much going on in there anymore because of how often they're getting hit. He said he went to a funeral of it was a multiple funeral of a whole bunch of people that died in that shelling attack on Kherson when 23 people died. I think that was just after the drones hit the Kremlin, and it looked like a bit of a retaliation. He said it's deeply sad. These people, I mean, some of the stuff he was saying was horrific about someone driving in a car with his wife, and literally shrapnel came in and took off half his head. And his wife had to continue driving the car whilst having the dead body of her husband on her and stuff like that. And it's just like, yeah, absolutely horrific. Just and a family who's like all their kids have been killed, and now one of their children had gone back to work after being injured previously in a shelling. He was an electrical So one of these infrastructure workers, he was saying it's really dangerous, like putting these electricity pylons and whatever, getting the electricity infrastructure up and running after it gets hit. These guys are actually in the war zone and often get hit again. And he just got back from being injured and being laid off, got back to work, and then was killed. And it's just deeply sad. So, you know, this when we're drawing lines on a map, just remember that this represents people dying all the time on both sides, and it's horrific. War sucks, and the quicker this is finished, the quicker this gets that is over, the better. And the quickest way this can be finished is for Ukraine to be given everything they need to finish the war and win the war successfully and quickly. The Russians, I don't think, are in a good position to be able to execute a successful military campaign. Certainly not anymore. And I think Ukraine will be in the ascendancy, and they just need to be given everything. Anyway, that's today's Frontline update. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much for your support. It's truly, truly appreciated. And it's going to be a crazy month or so ahead, possibly. I don't know how I'm going to cope with the mapping, but hey ho, we shall see. Anyway, toodle pip, speak soon.